Are you to order, sir?
Yes, I think we'll start with the soup.
Can I sit here? She almost said no. Not because of the wheelchair, not because of the uniform, but because his dog had not blinked since they walked in. It was staring at her, not with anger, not with fear, but like it recognized her, like it knew something about her. Something she had buried years ago and prayed would never follow her here. For a moment, the noise of the diner faded into the background. Plates still clattered. People still talked. Coffee machines hissed behind the counter, but none of it reached her the same way anymore. Her fingers tightened slightly around the notepad in her hand, and she forced a small, polite smile, the kind she had practiced for years. Sure, she said quietly, stepping back to make space at the corner booth near the window. When she placed the cup of coffee in front of him, careful not to let her hand shake, but the moment she leaned in, she felt it again. The dog's eyes followed every movement, sharp and unblinking, like it was studying her instead of simply watching. She forced herself not to react and slid the cup gently onto the table. "Anything else?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The man did not answer right away. His fingers wrapped around the cup, but he did not drink. Instead, he looked past her for a second, just a quick glance, but it was enough to feel deliberate. Then his eyes returned to her. "You been working here long?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "A while," she said. "Why?" He shrugged slightly. "I just asking." It sounded casual, but nothing about him felt casual. Not the way he sat, not the way his eyes moved, not the way his dog had still not relaxed. She nodded and stepped away, but this time she did not go far. Something made her pause near the counter, pretending to organize cups while keeping him in her peripheral vision. That was when she noticed it. The dog was no longer looking at her. It had shifted, slowly, quietly. Now its gaze was locked on someone else. Her eyes followed. 3 tables behind her station, near the wall, sat a man she had barely noticed before. Mid-30s, average build, dark jacket despite the warm diner air. He was alone, his food untouched, his posture slightly stiff. At first glance, nothing about him stood out. Just another customer passing through. But once she looked closer, she could not unsee it. His fingers kept tapping against the table, not random, controlled, repetitive. His eyes flicked up too often, scanning the room in quick, nervous bursts, and every few seconds his hand drifted toward his jacket pocket like checking something was still there. A strange chill crept up her spine. The dog did not blink. Back at the booth, the Navy SEAL slowly set his cup down without taking a sip. His gaze had shifted too now, not directly at the man, but close enough to track him without being obvious. It was subtle, controlled, the kind of movement you would miss if you were not already looking for it. But she was. And suddenly, she realized something that made her stomach tighten. This was not coincidence. Whatever the dog had sensed, the man had seen it too. She glanced between them again. The distance between the booth and the suspicious man felt smaller now, like the space itself had tightened. The noise of the diner began to feel distant again, like it was happening behind a wall she could not see. "Hey," her manager's voice snapped from behind the counter. "You zoning out now?" She turned quickly. "No, I'm good." "Then move. Table 6 needs refills." "Yeah." She grabbed a pitcher, but her focus was gone. Every step felt heavier, her attention split between pretending everything was normal and the growing tension pulling her back toward that corner booth. As she passed between tables, she noticed something else. The man in the dark jacket had stopped tapping, completely. His hand was now still, resting too firmly against his side, like he had made a decision. At the same time, the dog's posture changed. Not aggressive, not loud, but tighter, more focused. Its weight shifted slightly forward, muscles coiled beneath its fur, ready. Her breath caught. She looked back at the Navy SEAL. This time he was not pretending anymore. His eyes were fixed, direct, calculating. And for just a second their gazes met. No words were spoken. But in that moment, something passed between them. A silent understanding. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, it had not happened yet. But it was about to. She turned away quickly, her pulse starting to rise, trying to convince herself she was overthinking, that this was nothing more than a strange coincidence. But deep down, that feeling refused to fade. It only grew stronger. Behind her, a chair scraped lightly against the floor. Not loud enough for most people to notice, but enough. Enough for the dog's ears to twitch. Enough for the Navy SEAL hand to lower slowly toward the side of his chair. Enough for something invisible in the room to begin shifting into place. And no one else in that diner seemed to realize it. Not yet. If you like this pacing and tension, I'll move on to Act 3, Deeper Conflict plus Secrets plus Connection. Perfect. Let's raise the stakes. The man moved carefully, his wheelchair rolling forward with controlled precision. He was not old, maybe late 30s, but there was something in his posture that carried weight, something heavy and silent. His shoulders were straight, his movements efficient, like every action had purpose. The Navy SEAL insignia on his jacket was worn but clean, not for show but for memory. His eyes did not wander like most customers. They studied, measured, noticed everything, but it was the dog that held her attention. A large German Shepherd, powerful and alert, its fur clean and brushed, its stance rigid with focus. It did not sit when the man stopped. It did not relax. It stood beside him like a guard carved out of instinct, its eyes still locked on her as if she were the only thing in the room that mattered. She felt it in her chest before she understood it. That strange, uncomfortable pressure, like being watched too closely. Like being seen in a way no one ever saw her anymore. Okay? The man asked. His voice was calm, low, controlled. She blinked quickly and looked away from the dog. Yeah, sorry, just long shift. Long shift. He nodded once like he understood more than she said. Coffee, black. I got it? She turned before the dog could unsettle her again, moving quickly toward the counter, but even as she walked away, she could feel it, that stare, still on her back, still unbroken. Behind her, the man reached down and rested a hand lightly on the dog's neck. Not to calm it, not to command it, not to command it. Just there, like a connection, like he already knew something was wrong. The diner carried on like nothing had changed. A couple argued quietly in the far corner. A group of construction workers laughed too loudly near the entrance. The manager barked instructions from behind the register. Everything felt normal, looked normal, but it was not, because the dog had not moved. And now neither had the man's eyes. They were no longer on the menu. They were no longer on the room. They had shifted slowly, deliberately, back to her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she thought she had left behind. Fear, not the loud kind, not the kind that makes you run. The quiet kind, the kind that whispers something is wrong, even when everything looks perfectly fine. She reached for the coffee pot with slightly trembling hands, trying to steady herself. It made no sense. It was just a dog. Just a customer. People came and went every day. Nothing about this should feel different. But it did. And deep down, a thought began to surface. One she tried to push away the moment it appeared. What if the dog was not just looking at her? What if it was recognizing her from somewhere she could not afford to remember? She took a slow breath, picked up the cup, and turned back toward the table. The man was waiting. The dog was still watching. And something in the air had changed. Something she could not explain. Something that had just begun. She tried to keep moving, tried to focus on refilling glasses and clearing plates, but her attention kept snapping back to the same point in the room like something invisible was pulling it. The man in the dark jacket had not touched his food. Not once. And now his eyes were no longer scanning the diner randomly. They were fixed, not on the exits, not on the customers, on something specific, on her. Her steps slowed for just a second before she forced herself forward again, but that quiet pressure in her chest tightened. It did not feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like recognition. The same feeling the dog had given her moments earlier. She turned back toward the booth, her pulse uneven, and approached with careful steps. "You need anything else?" she asked, but her voice came out lower than she expected. The Navy SEAL looked up at her, his expression calm, but there was something behind it now, something sharper. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I need you to answer something honestly." Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her notepad. "Okay." He leaned forward just a fraction, his voice dropping enough that it would not carry beyond the table. "Do you feel safe here?" The question hit harder than it should have. She opened her mouth to give the automatic answer, the same one she had given 100 times before, but the words did not come out. because for the first time she was not sure. She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. Oh, why would you ask me that? His eyes held hers for a second longer than normal. Because my dog doesn't get things wrong. A chill ran through her. She glanced down at the German Shepherd. Up close, it felt even more intense. The animal was not just alert, it was reading the room, every movement, every shift in energy. And right now its focus had split between 2 points, her and the man in the dark jacket. What is it seeing? She whispered before she could stop herself. The Navy SEAL did not answer right away. Instead, his gaze flicked briefly past her shoulder. Oh, trouble, he said finally. The kind that doesn't announce itself. Her throat tightened. You think that guy? I don't think, he interrupted softly. I watch. The words settled heavily between them. Before she could respond, something slipped from her grip. Her pen, It fell to the floor and rolled, bouncing lightly against the tiles before drifting farther than she expected. Straight toward the table where the man in the dark jacket sat. Her heart skipped. For a second, she considered leaving it, walking away, pretending it did not matter. But something pushed her forward. Sorry, she muttered, stepping closer and crouching down to grab it. The world seemed to slow as she reached beneath the edge of the table. Her fingers closed around the pen, but just as she started to pull back, her eyes lifted slightly. And that was when she saw it, inside the man's jacket. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. A glimpse of cold metal. Compact, hidden, and very real. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze for half a second too long. The man's leg shifted slightly, just enough to let her know he had noticed her noticing. Their eyes met. Up close, there was nothing nervous about him anymore. No tapping fingers, no restless movement. Just stillness, controlled, focused. Like someone who had already made up his mind, she stood up too quickly, her chair brushing loudly against the floor as she stepped back. Sorry, she said again, but her voice was different now, tighter, thinner. Back at the booth, the dog's posture changed instantly. Its body lowered slightly, muscles tightening, ears forward. The Navy SEAL did not turn his head. He did not need to. What did you see? He asked quietly. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. The noise of the diner rushed back in around her, louder than before, like the world was trying to cover something up. He swallowed hard. He's got something, the man's hand. Slowly, subtly, inside his jacket, the dog let out the faintest growl, barely audible, but it cut through everything. The Navy SEAL exhaled once, controlled, steady. All right, he said under his breath. His hand dropped to the side of his chair, fingers tightening slightly. Not panicked, not rushed. Ready! Listen to me, said his voice calm but firm now. You're going to walk away from this table like nothing's wrong. Her eyes widened slightly. What? Don't run. Don't look back at him. Just move. Her pulse hammered in her ears. And for the first time, a faint edge appeared in his expression. Not fear, not doubt. Something else. Something colder. I'll handle it. The words should have been reassuring, but they were not. Because in that moment, she realized something far worse than what she had already seen. He had known. Before she dropped the pen, before she saw the weapon, before any of this became real, he had known something was going to happen, and he had stayed anyway. Behind her, a chair scraped again. Louder this time. Not accidental, deliberate. The kind of sound that comes right before everything changes. And suddenly every second felt like it was running out. Perfect. Now we hit the explosion. She forced her legs to move, one step at a time, just like he said. Not too fast, not too slow. Her back felt exposed, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, but she didn't. She walked. Past the table, past the edge of danger, back toward the counter where everything still looked normal, even though it wasn't anymore. Behind her, the air shifted. She didn't hear it at first. She felt it, that sudden drop in sound. That strange, heavy silence that spreads through a room right before something breaks. Then it happened. A chair slammed back. The man in the dark jacket stood up fast, too fast, his hand already pulling something from inside his coat. A gun. Someone screamed. Everything exploded into chaos. But the dog moved first. Faster than the scream, faster than the man's arm fully extending. The German Shepherd launched forward in a blur of muscle and precision, slamming into the man's torso with controlled force. The gun fired, but the shot went wild, shattering a glass behind the counter instead of hitting anyone. People dropped to the floor. Dishes crashed. The diner turned into panic. A down! The Navy SEAL voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Even from his chair, he moved with terrifying control. His hands gripped the wheels, pushing forward with speed, closing distance while the dog kept the man off balance. The attacker struggled, trying to regain control, but the 9 was relentless, trained for exactly this moment. The waitress froze behind the counter, her heart racing, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. The man hit the ground hard, the dog locking onto his arm, forcing the weapon away from his grip. The gun clattered across the floor, sliding under a nearby table. "Don't move," the Navy SEAL ordered, his voice low but absolute. The attacker didn't listen. Instead, he reached again, not for the gun, but for something else inside his jacket. Something smaller, something quicker. The dog reacted instantly, shifting position, blocking his movement before he could pull it free. But in that split second, the waitress saw it. A device. Not a weapon, something worse. Her stomach dropped. "Oh, wait!" she shouted without thinking. "He's got something else." The Navy SEAL eyes snapped to her for a fraction of a second, then back to the man. He saw it too now, the shape, the intent. His expression changed instantly. This was bigger than a robbery. "Everybody out!" he shouted louder this time. "Move! Now!" Panic doubled. People scrambled toward the exits, pushing, stumbling, desperate to get away. Chairs overturned. Glass shattered underfoot. The manager yelled something incoherent as he ran. But the attacker stopped struggling. And then he smiled. It was small, controlled, and completely wrong. "You're too late," he said quietly. The words cut through the chaos like a blade. The Navy SEAL grip tightened. "What did you do?" The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because at that exact moment, the dog froze. Not like before, not alert, not focused. Frozen. Its head snapped sharply toward the far side of the diner, toward the kitchen doors. Its body went rigid again, but this time, not because of the man on the ground, because of something else. Something no one had noticed. The Navy SEAL followed the dog's gaze, and for the first time since this started, his control slipped, just slightly. "Get out of here," he shouted again, but this time it wasn't just an order. It was urgency. Real urgency. Real urgency. Because whatever was coming next was already in motion, and the man on the floor was never the real threat. Clapperboard Act 5, final twist cliffhanger. The diner was almost empty now. Chairs lay scattered across the floor, shattered glass crunching under hurried footsteps as the last few customers pushed their way out. The noise that remained was different, no longer casual. No longer normal. It was sharp, broken, filled with panic that had not fully escaped the room yet. She stood frozen behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her legs refused to move, even though every instinct told her to run. The Navy SEAL turned his chair toward the kitchen doors, his eyes locked in the same direction as the dog's. The attacker on the floor was no longer fighting. He had gone completely still, that same faint smile resting on his face like he had already won. "Stay down," the SEAL said without looking back, his voice controlled but urgent. The dog took one slow step forward, then another. Its body was tight, every muscle ready, every sense locked onto something beyond those swinging kitchen doors. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doors moved. Not fast, not forced, just a slight push from the other side. A shadow slipped through the gap. Her breath caught. A second man stepped out from the kitchen, calm, steady, wearing the same neutral expression as someone who did not belong in the middle of chaos. In his hand, low and almost hidden against his side, was another weapon, smaller, controlled, precise, no panic, no hesitation. This one was different. The dog growled, deeper this time, the sound vibrating through the room like a warning that came too late. The Navy SEAL didn't hesitate. His hands moved instantly, turning his chair, placing himself between the counter and the threat, without even thinking about it. "Get down!" he shouted. She dropped behind the counter just as the second man raised his weapon. A shot rang out. Then another, wood splintered above her. Something shattered behind her. She pressed herself lower, her heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else out. The dog lunged again, but this time the distance was greater. The angle was wrong. The second man adjusted, calm, precise. Too precise. The Navy SEAL pushed forward faster than seemed possible, closing the gap despite everything working against him. His movements were not rushed. They were calculated. Every second counted. Every inch mattered. Another shot. This one closer. Too close. The dog reached him first, colliding with his arm just as he fired again, knocking the aim off just enough to save a life. The weapon skidded across the floor, but the man did not panic. He stepped back immediately, already shifting to his next move like this was only one part of a much larger plan. "Time's up," he said calmly. The words didn't make sense, not until the first man on the ground started laughing. Low, quiet, controlled, con esto. The Navy SEAL froze for half a second, his eyes flicking between both men. Something clicked, something he had not seen before. "Where is it?" he demanded. Neither of them answered. The dog stopped moving, not because the threat was gone, but because it had changed again. Slowly, its head turned, away from both men, away from the door, back toward the counter, back toward her. Her breath stopped. "Oh no," she whispered, barely audible. The Navy SEAL followed the dog's gaze. And then everything shifted. His expression changed in a way it hadn't before. Not just alert, not just focused. Certain. "A step away from the counter," he said slowly. Her heart dropped. "What? Now?" She shook her head slightly, confusion mixing with fear. "I didn't do anything." "I know," he said, "but something did." Her hands trembled as she pushed herself up just enough to look down. At first, she didn't see it. Just the usual clutter. Towels, cups, supplies. Then her eyes caught something out of place. A small black object, taped beneath the inner shelf, hidden, silent, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her all at once. The dog hadn't been watching her because of who she was. It had been watching her because of where she was standing. The attacker near the door smiled faintly again. "Now," he said softly. The Navy SEAL didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe for a second, because in that moment there was only one question left. Not how this started, not who they were, but how much time was left. The dog took one slow step closer to her. The room fell completely silent, and somewhere deep beneath the noise that had already shattered this place, something began to tick.